education director. Oh, whoops. All right. Now we can officially start here. I'm Grendel. I'm education director at Letterform Archive, which is also the home of Type West, our School of Type Design. And we have an international audience today. So please type in where you're coming from in the chat. And also let us know what brought you here. And of course, if you have questions for our speaker, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll deal with those at the end of the talk. First, I want to give a massive shout out to Skilla Zaccolini, who's doing the behind the scenes work to make this lecture series happen. Thank you, Skilla. All right. Welcome to Letterform Lectures 2023. We have just this last 2 lectures of the year this week and in 3 weeks. So tune in for that. Letterform Archive is the home of Type West. If you are looking to expand your typographic toolbox, or you're interested in learning how to develop your own original typeface, or maybe you're a graphic designer who just wants to take your lettering skills to the next level, our application window for the 2024 year-long certificate program has closed, but never fear. We have loads of upcoming workshops that will help you fine-tune your type skills. Let me tell you about some of them coming up. We have typographic knitting. This workshop will keep you in stitches as you knit up your favorite fonts. Just in time for the winter holidays, learning type knitting will give you so many cozy gift ideas. And there are only a couple spots left in this one, so sign up now or you'll miss out. Then we have Make Your Own Paper Gems. We have fantastic paper artist Dorothy Yuki, who will set you up with some lovely letterformy materials from the archive to create jewelry, boxes, and more in this fantastic in-person workshop. These will make great handmade holiday decorations, gifts, or just fun things to wear yourself. And then finally, before the holidays, we have the miniature Letterform Holiday Cafe with Tammy Knight, who teams up with the archive to provide everything you'll need to make one of the coolest holiday dioramas ever. Don't miss out on this fun, crafty, in-person one-day class. Okay, and then next up in our lecture series, we have former Type West instructor and font designer extraordinaire James Edmondson, who will give us the skinny on his type adventures. James is always a great balance of hilarious, insightful, and brutal honesty. So join us in 3 weeks for that. So for more information on all of the events I mentioned and more, go to letarc.org/events. And better yet, become a Letterform Archive member to help keep great lectures like this one today going. Last but not least, you can follow us on Instagram to stay on top of upcoming events and programs. We have 2 accounts, Letterform Archive and Type West. Follow them both. Okay, Letterform Lectures are co-presented by the Letterform Archive and the SFPL Book Arts and Special Collections. Letterform Archive is a nonprofit institution that houses over 100,000 works of graphic design history in-house. We are dedicated to the art and the craft of the letterform. And you can view all our Letterform lectures online soon after they happen. Just check our website, letterformarchive.org. Okay, we are about to begin. We extend a very warm welcome to Kyle Letendre, a human rhinestone who glitters up type and image in whatever they design. And I had the great pleasure of meeting Kyle in Guadalajara at the Letrestica conference, and I could not have been more impressed with their approach to both work and life, adding compassion, fun, and sparkles to whatever they touch. And I asked Kyle for a funny story, and this is what Kyle said. Once Kyle was trying to mail a t-shirt to a very famous drag queen, but Kyle was returning a computer at the same time, and muddled the labels. So the drag queen got the computer and the computer company got the t-shirt. And so then the poor drag queen had to deal with Kyle's mistake, and Kyle is mortified to this day about that. Okay, folks, without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Kyle Letendre. Take it away, Kyle.
Hello, I'm just going to share my screen. Oops. I'm going to share my screen real quick and hopefully embarrass myself less than I did with our Lord and Savior, Sasha Velour.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everybody at the Letterform archive. Can you see this okay? I trust that Grendel and co will stop me if for some reason the slides aren't going, but I want to thank you all so much for having me here and for the space to talk about design and drag, which feels really surreal. I swear I have a bruise on my arm from pinching myself every time I get to do something like this. So sincerest thank yous. My name is Kyle Letendre. Truthfully, I will answer to anything that starts with an L so long as it's mostly polite. Letendre also works, as Grendel said. But I am a big fat sissy. And currently I live here in Portland, Oregon, which is really beautiful and full of fig trees and queer people, and I love it a lot. In drag, you can call me Tomboy, and I would be a terrible drag artist if I didn't take this opportunity to list my Instagram and beg of you to follow it, but there it is, just in case. And my drag is something that started pretty recently. I will get into the process about how this kind of birthed out into the world as we talk today, but it is something that has been in my brain for a long time and has been something I've been really thrilled to get out into the real world. I love to explore beauty outside of a traditional binary. I don't really see myself as a drag king or a drag queen, but more as a drag thing, which is a wonderful title. I cannot take credit for myself, but I do love that. I'm new to drag. I started performing just in August, but I have been a fan of drag and in drag spaces since they would let me at 18. And I've worked with some queens from RuPaul's Drag Race, which is really exciting. This was the first one from about 13, 14 years ago when I showed up to Manila Lazan's meet and greet at Spin, a now defunct bar. And I think it's a ramen bar space now in Boys Town in Chicago. And I just kind of awkwardly handed her this illustration, went about my way home, and I got a really sweet email later asking if she could use this on a t-shirt, to which I said, of course. I've also had the pleasure of working for Mo Hart, Dora Delano, and Chicago's Pride and Joy, one of my favorite drag artists of all time, Shea Coulee. Thanks to Dan Poliak, who is in the audience today. We went to design school together, and he reached out to ask if I had any interest in doing some illustrated titles for one of Shea's many incredible music videos, which to this day is one of the proudest things I've had a chance to work on. So thank you, Dan, for that opportunity. And most recently, I've also gotten to do the design for Portland's own Carby Barbie Rye Bread, who is my real life partner, but just wanted to throw that bread tag in there. Most of my work comes from this place that is super glow in the dark gay. I like to joke that you can see my queerness from space, and it has been a force that has driven a lot of my personal work. And really creates this opportunity to talk about my life experience and the world that I see around me and how it sometimes does match up with those ideals and how it sometimes does not. And it's super, super satisfying when that comes back in client work. This was from this past summer. A distillery company out of Canada asked me to do a pride label for their gin, which was really fun. I was thinking a lot about my first nights out in queer bars and how you would kind of wake up the morning after with little matchbooks, stickers, photo booth remnants of your night out, and kind of have this to piece together everything fabulous that happened the night before. So to get to kind of think about all these things and also buy myself dinner with that money is a surreal honor. Sometimes I get really strange briefs, no pun intended. This was for Saks, which is an underwear company based here in Portland and also Vancouver, BC. And they asked me to create a pride print, which still to design for underwear was a lot of fun and also very strange. I don't think a lot of us have a precedent for doing that sort of a thing, but it was really worthwhile when I got to direct some money towards SAGE, which is an organization that protects LGBTQIA+ elders. And I could talk about this for the next 4 hours if I had the ability to, about how much LGBTQ elders have made an impact on all of our lives and our freedoms. But suffice it to say for this was one of the most meaningful projects I've gotten to be a part of. So thank you to Sage and Saks. But being this kind of like lone weirdo queer person in a lot of the design agencies and small boutiques that I started working in was a kind of surreal and strange experience. Certainly to look out in search of peers and find other people that saw things the way I did, it was really difficult. And I think even defining what that kind of tension between me and the greater heteropatriarchal world was, it was kind of hard to figure out what that was. And much like queerness, I think it's something that is hard to define. And sometimes the more that we try to put bounds around it, the more that it squeaks out and says, no, not quite. And I found that this mirrored a lot of my experience for how I felt kind of outside of the norm of a lot of my peers. But the more that I leaned into this queer ethos and to learning about queer history and the elders that came before me, the more meaningful my work became, the more powerful I felt, and the less concerned I was if there was some weird straight guy who didn't get it. I return to this quote all the time. I think it's a beautiful piece of writing from Bell Hooks that really sums up a lot of how I feel, which is queer not as being about who you're having sex with, that can be a dimension of it, but queer as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it and has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. It's something that I think about a lot in terms of how I interact with society around me and how I want to leave spaces queerer, more inclusive and kinder after I've entered them, but it can be a lonely path. And I think sometimes when we're in type and design, especially, we can view these as kind of extremes, one or the other, right? In glyphs and RoboFont, even if you're drawing type in Illustrator, you're often working in strict black and white. You're defining here's where the shape is and here is where it's not. And that stands in stark contrast to a lot of how the rest of the world operates. Even as we print it, yes, there's definitely fine lines between the black and the white, but as it seeps into the paper, as the fibers bleed and the ink gets between black and white into this beautiful gray, I think it's easy to say that those divisions are a lot less substantial. Often, even though I identify as non-binary, I find myself thinking in this really extreme binary, as I think a lot of people in our society often are conditioned to as well, of something is either this or that. It's all the way good, or it's all the way bad, or I'm killing it, or I'm just a total failure. Thinking of things in these extremes is, I think, just a product of our society and can also reinforce a binary even when it's not helpful. And what I love so much about queer ethos is that it suggests this idea of this, that, or the other, which is kind of this magical third option. It's actually a part of a visual language that has showed up a lot in my sketchbooks more recently. Last summer, I tasked myself with sketching from our garden, from our yard, and only giving myself black, white, and pink, which in this context was this, that, and the other, or light, dark, and the accent piece. As somebody who feels like a personified accent piece, I guess I just found a lot of meaning in this whole process. But the truth is, I think there is so much beauty in the spaces in between these extremes. And maybe there's even more beauty in the spaces beyond what we can categorize. I see it a lot in the work of Underwear, which is a phenomenal type foundry, and they have this gorgeous, mind-blowing project called Liza Pro that types a lot like custom lettering. So as you can see here, all of these O's that type out sequentially are different from the one before it so that it mimics that somebody was doing this by hand. But it is a typeface. It's programmed to work on autopilot for you. So it's this incredible thing that ends up somewhere between type and lettering and in this space that is wholly and uniquely its own. And I think that's really gorgeous. And though I don't know the folks at Underwear, I would say that this design is very queer just by that description. It's also something I see in the work of, oops, did that transition or did it go? There we go. It's also the work that I see in my friend Noah Camp, who makes work that is 3D rendered and somewhere between type and illustration and sometimes movement. And of course, I chose the 3 best letters to show Noah's work, G-A-Y. But I think it's this really gorgeous approach that creates something that's entirely new in between these 2 disciplines. I also see it in the work of Arthur Reinders-Fulmer, who runs Type Archer. I highly recommend you go to this website, typearcher.com. He uses the technology of variable fonts to illustrate and animate things from on to off, which is really incredible. In this example here on the left, we see a vine on a surface, and as you scroll the dial, it becomes more lush and full of life. And so it's something that is neither fully illustration or type, but something in between and better than the sum of those parts. I also see it in the work of Beatriz Lozano, who is an incredible, sweetheart, talented person who's based, I believe, in New York. And she makes these incredible pieces of AR that are sometimes, so they occupy in a physical space as you're working with your camera, and it can appear both real and not real and surreal and all of these things all together. It's really a remarkable body of work that she's built, and it feels very queer coded to me in that it kind of defies definition. I love Beatrice. There is so much beauty in the other, in otherness, I think. It's a feeling that I first felt when I went to my first gay bar in Minnesota. If my nervous accent ever comes out, don't you know that's why. But the Gay 90s is a fabulous gay bar there that had my first experience with drag queens when I turned 18. And I really feel like there's a before and after in my life about being exposed to those kinds of artists. As an art form, drag quickly became my favorite medium to be a fan of in the audience, and it has taught me so much just by being around it. It is something that really defies categorization. It encourages the blending of medium. And I think every time you think you've thought that you've seen the best kind of a drag performance, you can show up again at 9 o'clock. The show will start at 10 o'clock. And then you'll be able to see something, I think, wholly and incredibly new. So no matter what you think you know, drag has a tendency to subvert it and flip it over on its head. Drag is also where I got my de facto freelance motto from. If you've got a check, I've got a talent. So drag really can teach us a lot of things, I promise. But as the unfortunate recipient of my oversized computer has said better than I ever could, drag is the art form of the queer imagination. Sasha Velour saying it best as always. And I really love that broad framework for what drag can be, and especially as we start to think about it in opposition or comparison to graphic and type design, because whereas drag is this subversive art, it's a political statement, it's the safe space for folks who have been othered and the center of a lot of community building. I like to think of it as a queer talent show. It's something that centers joy and community and activism and healing, whereas on the other hand, graphic design tends to just get capitalism dressed every morning, which is a really depressing truism that I try not to spend too much time on, but I think that it is kind of a bristling tension between design and drag. And there's a lot of good things about designing for others, right? If you work in lettering or graphic design, you could argue that you help to give voice to others, which was something I was able to do when I worked with Penguin Random House last summer. We put out a series of billboards and zines that were highlighting the work of various LGBTQIA+ authors. And so to give them a different visual voice, to extend their work, especially in this climate where a lot of these books were being banned, is something really beautiful and something I'm very grateful for within design. It's also really nice in that I work from home just with my cat and my dog, and they don't have a lot of great opinions about how to make my letters better. So in the case of working for clients, getting to have fresh eyes, new perspective on your work, and to make the work better as a result is something I'm super grateful for. So design is not all bad. I'm not here to cancel design. But there are definitely some weird things that happen when design and queerness overlap. Obviously, I'm making a joke a little bit about some of these potential Pride collaborations, none of which I've had the honor of working for just yet, but there's still time. Call me Monsanto. Just kidding. But there is this kind of weird thing that happens when queerness and capitalism and graphic design all converge together. And I've been on the receiving end of a lot of these briefs, and I'm not here to cancel any art directors by any means. I think we're largely all doing our best out here. But the brief often starts with, show us what pride means to you. And then it comes back a couple days after I sent my sketch that's like, ooh, no, not like that, which is fair, but I think the process of putting out what a pure form of what my queer idea could be and having it disseminate through various art directors and through the line of approvals and then also through the channels of distribution tends to water down the message inherently. And that's no one's fault. It's just a part of the process. But it does have a tendency to lose a little bit of that flavor and its meaning over time. And especially in this last year, 2 years, we've seen a lot of really intense backlash to Pride organizations, Pride initiatives, various LGBTQIA+ causes in the greater culture. And it's been pretty terrifying to bear witness to it in real time. This year with MLB, they put out a rainbow colored version of their logo. And within just a couple hours, they had turned it back to their normal colors. Based on public pressure. I think it's a bit of a running joke inside queer circles that on July 1st, everything goes back from Pride and into corporate blues and reds, but this one happened at record speed. So that is both something to laugh at, but mostly something to be terrified over. And so I returned to this idea of drag as this kind of incredible art medium that is creating both by and for queer people. And as a result, we're able to say things that are a lot more personable, a lot more true. There are often fewer barriers between my message and getting it out than in graphic design, which is really beautiful. And because this is a thing that's made both for and by us, we get to play with our own rules. This is a local Portland drag artist, and I'll be highlighting a lot of my friends that I've met here. Asia Consent, I think, is one of the funniest names in drag, and they're also extremely nice, which is just too bad. But I love that their beauty is something that feels entirely their own. They get to create their own kind of glamour and fashion that feels really queer, really their own. And I think it stands in stark contrast to me to graphic design in that the only person who had to approve this on the other end was Asia and her vision. And so we have a really beautiful, kind of pure artistic output at the end. I think a central tension here is that design exists to sell a product, whereas drag exists to sell the fantasy. And those are two things that will always be a little bit in contrast with one another, especially as capitalism and graphic design tend to put us into boxes of demographics in order to sell to us more easily. I don't think there's anything nefarious there, but I do think that it butts up against what queerness can be pretty often. And so if you find yourself asking, why am I doing any of this, as I sometimes do with all things in my life, be it graphic design, drag, or just doing the dishes, I'm here to tell you you are not alone in wondering that. And I've returned to drag as this thing that really posits the idea of joy for the sake of joy. And I think in a capitalist structure where we're always trying to figure out how we can monetize things and pay for our living, this is a really enticing and tricky idea. And maybe as type designers, as graphic designers, we are often asked a similar thing. Why would you spend so much time on all of this? And I think it is a very fair and also very mean-spirited question to ask of each other, especially as I have been busy sewing like a mad person. But I think that there's something within drag that can be really, really beautiful. This idea of holding on to something and working it out and getting it out into the real world is just a little bit different from design, especially in the social media age where you can unleash all of your best ideas in front of somebody's eggs Benedict rather than just over their feed while they're on the toilet or laying down, who knows what. This is my partner, Rybread, who has talked about this idea of doing the number from Chicago, I Simply Cannot Do It Alone, as a wavy, wacky, inflatable arm man tube guy, which is insane and extremely hazardous for all of the light bulbs nearby, but which was a ton of fun to be a part of. And internally to get to see this go from a crazy what if idea into something that she was doing out in the real world. I find that a lot of my most meaningful work has come from this similar place of making something simply because I had. I grew up in a pretty strict masculine kind of a space, which I'm sure is really shocking based on how butch I sound and how masculine I present. But a lot of the pressure that I received from my family growing up was that boys don't draw or sew or care about style or the Spice Girls or any of that. And having realized at some point that I had made a life for myself out of all of the things that boys don't do, I wanted to create my own little sissy punk jacket. So I hand sewed all of these sequins onto the back and stitch it onto a reclaimed Forever 21 jacket. And yeah, sometimes the connections that you can make just from speaking out what you have to put out into the world can be the most meaningful, I've found. Putting out your work as a call to others is something that I've learned a lot about from Dan Radigan, my friend and creative hero. I have given this talk to him once in person and gotten to see him squeal. I trust that he is squealing on the other side of a computer now, but Dan was the only out queer designer that I knew about when I was in design school. And while that sounds really insignificant, maybe to some, and is not a pressure or a responsibility rather that Dan signed up for himself, it is something that really made me feel like I could exist in these spaces, and that is not insignificant. Dan's work has taken a lot of forms over the years, and I think one of my favorite bodies of work that he's made is Pink Mints, which is a series of lovingly risographed zines about typography and gay men and the intersection that happens with those. And I think it's this really interesting thing where he is able to create a smoke signal to others that says, come over here if you're interested in this, and it certainly worked for me. In fact, this typeface that you've been reading this whole time is Gloridot by Bijou Type, which is Dan's foundry. I highly recommend going to support it. I'm not part of like an MLM here. I just really want to see queer people do well, and especially my friends. So please go give Dan money. But this typeface was taken from a gay porn magazine, and I think it's really fascinating how we can go really quickly from talking about something that may seem a little tawdry, a little salacious, into considering the life that the people who made these magazines were leading. It was illegal in various states for the last big parts of the last century to own or disseminate or make magazines and literature that were gay in nature. So we go from talking about this kind of tawdry thing into realizing all of the danger that people were putting themselves into just because they wanted to connect and make space and community with others. And I think that's really beautiful and starts really kind of changing the lens on more than just a design product, a thing that we've collected, into also the people who made it and what kind of life they led. And I think there's a reminder in here that I also see in drag that sometimes we can be a little bit less serious about very serious work. Or be very serious about something that is not at all serious, and that frivolity can be something that can really propel us forward. So in Dan's work, I really see this reminder of sift through everything that's out in the world. And Lord knows with the internet and Instagram and TikTok and Pinterest, we have so many inspirations available to us. But what I like so much about Dan's work and his approach is that it says, find what speaks to you and kind of investigate what that says about you. It's something that I see a lot in the Portland drag scene. Jocelyn Knobs was somebody who was very integral in me joining Portland drag. Even before I put the lashes on, she cut across the line in concessions for me and was just like, what is this about? What are you doing? Who are you? And kind of made me feel comfortable in this space from the get-go. And what I really also admire about Jocelyn, and that I hope to see more of in a design capacity, is that people are really creating opportunities for others to thrive in a way that maybe they wish existed when they were getting into drag. So Jocelyn hosts this incredible, exuberant pageant in town called The Most, and it is, as it sounds, just a total bonanza, excuse me, of artistry and queer love and rhinestones, and it was just fabulous. There are also plenty of opportunities where drag serves as a bit of a funnel into other interests here within Portland, although I know this happens across the world. Wolfgang X, who is on the left, has a company called Tacky Wacky. He's one of my favorite producers here in Portland. This is for a show that was the Munsters versus the Addams Family, and that's my partner Rye Bread and the big tinsel cousinette. He just had a Bob's Burger show on Sunday. He had a Spice Girl show earlier this summer. I love that they're all kind of Venn diagrams of here's a niche interest and here's drag. And if you're into both of those, come party and have some pizza. It's also something we see in town with Mars and Max Presents, who had a whole series of shows based on each individual planet. This is one of my favorites here in town, Wanda Ann Cosmos, who I believe is a literal superhero, and she was performing at the Jupiter show. I love that if you are interested in space and things that are bigger than us and also want to find a queer environment or framework to think about those things, we've got it for you here in Portland, and they also serve really good vegan chicken wings there, so we got it all. If you are online, there's also this big fabulous thing called Dungeons and Drag Queens. Don't worry if you do not understand the game of Dungeons and Dragons, neither do these drag queens. And so that makes for a lot of fun as an experience. And I think keeps broadening up this world of who can be in drag, who can get into drag, who can be a part of this. And my answer from all of this research is everyone, please. So I think there's this really interesting prospect here that shows up. I like to kind of sketch potential makeup ideas, and I called this temporary drag character Venn diagram. So very proud of that really bad pun. But maybe drag can be this way to think about here's one part of you and here's another. And by combining them, you can create something that is entirely unique to you and kind of affords this opportunity to speak from full voice about anything you're interested in. It's why I think it's really important for graphic designers to maintain a practice outside of Pixels and Illustrator, if at all possible. I'm not saying you are a better or worse person for doing this, but I think that having an outlet outside of your main day-to-day expression can be really useful and be something that you can learn a lot from. This is an illustration by Portland's own Brett Stenson, who is an absolute sweetheart. And I'm really, really inspired by watching him develop and blossom into this artist as I've known over the last couple of years. And his practice outside of his day job is carving and painting these beautiful sculptures. And I personally have loved watching this because I think you can feel a similarity between the two. Even when he's working in vector, there's this sense of carving positive and negative space that shows up in his carvings. And then also seeing these just gorgeous color palettes in a completely unexpected space. There's this mix of tradition here, something new, something old, something really graphic. I think it's just phenomenal, and it's been a real treat to watch Brett blossom. I also see it in Maria de Roli. I'm so sorry, Maria. I have only ever pronounced your name online, it seems, but she is a fabulous, fabulous type designer who runs Contrast Foundry. And I took these just from experience she had been posting on Instagram of carving out various letters from clay. And I think it's a really interesting way to change how the brain sees positive and negative, how it sees the space, with the M in there in particular, using light and shadow to differentiate between the strokes is a really beautiful thing. And I would assume helps Maria think about letters in a digital space just a little bit differently. It's also something we see in Jill DeHaan, who is one of my favorite illustrators ever. She's an incredible painter, a wicked illustrator, a phenomenal lettering artist, and then she also has the audacity to go and learn wood carving like this. It's rude to be this good at everything, but she's also a sweetheart. I love that you get to see this kind of lush, tactile 3D approach show up in all of these mediums, and it's just been a thrill to watch her blossom over the last couple of years. It's also something I get to see in one of my closest friends who I met at Letendre, Mook Monsalve, who is based in Buenos Aires. She has a fabulous collaboration with one of her friends called Musa del Asfalto. Please go to their Instagram. Please follow Mook because she is a sweetheart and so talented. I have one of her scarves on here. And what I love so much about Mook's work is that she is inspired by the city and the urban infrastructure and finds a way to put that into type design and then on a scarf. I think it's wild and crazy that this is kind of like the test environment for her typefaces. It's like, but how will it print sublimation printed? How will it read while it's printed on moving silk? It's just a wild thing to ask. And it's also this kind of beautiful exchange between the person and the city and the city and the person. She recently released a new collaboration that highlights a lot of the buses in Buenos Aires. So there's a different scarf for a number of different popular lines, and it has all of the stops along the side on the bottom. I think it's a really beautiful way. Maybe all of us in this kind of post Sex in the City world have had this kind of like romantic relationship with our city, and I've done things inspired by our surroundings in various ways, but I have not seen somebody take it in the way that Mook has. I absolutely love her. So hi, Mook, if you're here. If you are an activist, there's also a way to bring that into design or drag. I think Patagonia, which is also a great drag name, is a wonderful template for somebody who has taken their passion for climate change and brought that into drag. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to do this with design as well. I think ultimately drag serves as this invitation to infuse your story into what you're doing, and that it can be an asset to the process. It's something that I see in the work of Barry Lee, who is a non-binary deaf and disabled illustrator out of Atlanta, Georgia. And so their work feels very tactile, very personable, feels like it could be done only by that kind of perspective. And I think that's really beautiful. What you see is something that feels really engaging, really full of love, and especially as it's been released into various Pride projects. They were part of the big MailChimp rebrand from a couple years ago, if you saw that. And I love that their work feels just utterly undeniably Barry. And I think that there's a way that maybe we could all learn from this unapologetic infusion of our own personality. It's also something that I love about one of my peers in lettering, Andre Labassis, who is Brazilian and illustrates a lot from this place of what it's like to live in the Afro-Latino queer experience in Brazil. And just by putting things out there that reflected that, they have had these incredible brand collaborations where people wanted to really tap into that voice and have them show off more of what they can achieve. I am constantly in awe of what they are doing with Letterforms. I think this queer idea shows up a lot of how can we keep the door open for more and more people to come in? How can we keep one 3D printed heel, which this is on Etsy if anyone wants to buy it for me. It's a great door stopper. But how can we use that metaphorically and maybe also in real life to keep the gates open and invite more and more people into the conversation rather than limiting who can be a part of it? It's something that came to mind a lot when I was at that recent Jupiter show that I mentioned. The host was Isaiah Esquire, a fabulous dancer here in Portland. And during one of the introductions, they offered something that has stuck with me basically every day since I heard it, which is, when you came out, did you know that you could take your whole self with you? And I think that's a really profound thing to ruminate on, especially when I was thinking about my days in college. And the prevailing wisdom at the time was to be an empty vessel, to be a blank slate for people to be able to add on to mold us into whatever they needed to form. And I understand how that is well-intentioned, but I think it's very difficult to enact in reality Because I think to reduce everything that we bring culturally, individually, as people, and just focus on our output, it's a pretty white supremacist framework that we're mirroring, and it does nobody a lot of great services, except for maybe a couple at the top that are making the most money, to reduce ourselves into just output machines. So drag is this thing that reminds us to bring our entire self with us, that there is no ability to really compartmentalize ourselves. At the end of the day, sure, you can sequester bits and pieces, but to bring your whole self with you can be a real gift, especially in the arts. It's something I've been thinking about a lot as I have been blending type and lettering together more recently. This was for a talk last week with PSU here in Portland, where I painted type onto my face for the first time, and it was just kind of a fun and wild way to combine all of these parts of myself that I'd kind of thought I needed to keep separate. And indeed, even my sketching process has been something that I have been involving a lot more regularly, as I've shifted from a sketchbook that reflected the world around me into more of a sketchbook that reflected what I want to see on my own face. And so I've learned, even just in this process, that ideating things, sketching in the way that I do, can all transfer over into drag, which is really exciting. And more than that, in much the way that I built community around design by posting parts of the process online on Instagram, people seem to really resonate with that part of it in drag as well, which has been really nice. People always like to see how the sausage is made, so to speak. And in truth, I think a lot of your skills will transfer from one to the other. On the left is a flat makeup brush, which has been my favorite thing I found because it mirrors so much the flat brush that I've used in sign painting and in various letter arts. So there are a lot of similarities. It's fun to chat with other drag artists who have a more blended, less graphic style that often use softer brushes, and how different those kind of end up in our own personas. Similarly, I love a Tombow marker. I'm sure a lot of us illustrators in here are big fans. This is not a paid advertisement, although I would accept any free Tombows that get sent my way. Wink, wink. But it is not too different altogether from using a superfine mascara, or an eyeliner, pardon me. So there are a lot of overlaps in one medium to another. And I think the more I learn about one, the more I learn about the other, which is really exciting. Another lesson that I got out of my sketchbook from last summer was to limit my choices in order to be able to get to work sooner. I have a form of creative paralysis, I would say, at times, often formed by overwhelm. If there are too many colors to choose from, I find myself being too stuck in the which one do I go with. So for last summer, I gave myself the limitation of just black, white, and pink, which was really, really kind to myself in a way, because you can never say, I did a terrible job on that leaf because I didn't have green to draw with. So finding ways around my own self-loathing tends to be the magic step, both in design and drag. But limiting things can also get you out into doing things sooner, I think. When it came to drag, I was really overwhelmed by how many different things I wanted to accomplish. There's hair, there's body, there's makeup, there's fashion, there are performance ideas, and I decided to just eliminate a couple of those in order to get myself finally out of the gates. And that started with just saying I'm not going to do wigs right now. And I probably will at some point, but figuring out how to do that from scratch felt like the one thing that if I could remove it, maybe I could get started faster. And I also find within drag, it's been this nice difference from graphic design, where I feel a lot of us feel the pressure to reinvent and do something completely new every time that we hit send on an email or work with a new client. But drag has been kind of this opportunity to explore an idea for a little bit longer. And rather than asking myself how I can totally serve something up in a different manner than the last time I did it, I'm kind of just wondering, like, what if I take this sketchbook and put it through a meat grinder, put it through a smoothie blender, and then on the other hand, maybe I'll have something that's a little bit different, a little gross tasting on the end perhaps, but a little bit different looking. So all of my drag ideas were something that started in my sketchbook in December of 2021. And I offer this both as a bit of a grace, hopefully, to anybody in the room that has had ideas you've been sitting on. I think letting those ideas pickle and take their time can be really valuable. And to get real experience out in the world to start performing, as I have been using drag as a reference, has been really nice, and has started to give me different tools for what I think is achievable. And so I also am a big believer in using external deadlines to sometimes get done the things that you really want. The first time I ever performed in drag was for TypeCon this summer here in Portland in August. Again, this is an idea I've had brewing for a long time, but I just was too too chicken and scared and terrified to do something that I love so much. So I just put out a proposition really as a means to get free tickets to TypeCon to say, hey, I'll do this talk in drag, thinking for sure it would not get chosen. And then it did, so I had to make it happen, which is kind of a nice place to be, to use other people's deadlines to get things done that you want to. So I sketched up this look and then sewed it for the talk, which is a lot of fun and has unleashed a whole can of worms. But this idea, this kind of like sketching things first and then making them a real thing, comes over from illustration, and I think can be a way to really calm my brain. I get so overwhelmed, and if I can look back at a sketch to sort of be my plan of action, my route forward, then I've been a little bit more successful in getting things done. And I think ultimately the freeing thing with drag is that it all wipes away after an hour or so. It's kind of like cake decorating in that you can be really meticulous about something, but at the end of the day, someone's still going to take a bite and devour it. At the end of the day with drag, you still need to shower it off and go to bed. And at least if you want to protect your skin, it's good to wipe it off. And there's something freeing about the time limit of that. I've also been leaning into other parts of my neuroses, which is a fun, maybe that's the title of this whole era of my life, but being a sort of neurotic planner and using Notion as I did since studying at Type of Cooper, I started to use this for makeup ideas and to keep a bit of a digital sketchbook for my face whenever I had ideas for different things to paint. And since I've put this together, I've painted a couple of these off of this, but it's kind of nice to remove the element of choice from doing. And if there's a day where I need to get ready and I don't know what to do, I can just turn to this and pick something out of the heap. But I offer this also. Sketching is just a way that helps turn my hands into a printer for my brain and helps me move forward getting something made into real life, whether that's graphic design, whether that is the layout for a garden or for drag. But it's not the only way you have to ideate. If you are not a sketcher by nature, that does not make you any better or worse than anyone in this room. Mondo from Project Runway would always write lists of things, and I thought that was a really beautiful way to ideate. There are plenty of people who have done this for years, who have made Pinterest boards or mood boards and chopped things all up together. Perfectly fine way to ideate. And so I think no matter where you come from, drag is this reminder that how you put things together, how you do it in your own way can really be the magic sauce. This is the late, great Chi Chi DeVayne from RuPaul's Drag Race Season 8, who entered wearing a fabulous gown made out of trash bags. And I think the reminder that you do not need to have everything in order to be everything is a really beautiful message in here. And this kind of scrappiness of anything can be inspiration is something I see in the work of fabulous New York illustrator and designer Braulio Amado. He often posts these photos he sees around New York. This is on the train. Sometimes it's of literal garbage or a couple of bags mashed up on the sidewalk, and he will reinterpret that into a poster for various events around town. And I think that's just incredible. And also, if anybody knows this person wearing this outfit on the subway train, please let me know, because I would love for them to be my drag parent or to get that outfit. It's incredible. Taking things that are around you and turning it into something more wild and fabulous, I think, is the core of drag and is something we see a lot with Faye Ludes, who is an incredible drag artist who made this just absolutely insane, larger than life Furby. It's worth looking this up online just to see in a movement, because there are tiny little human legs under it as it walks around. It just gets better. Using what's around you and turning that into art is something that I saw in this body of work from Lisa Reinerman. And so I'm not sure what city this was in, but she went around wandering and looking up between the buildings, and the negative space between those buildings forming different letters was the base for this alphabet. And it has stuck with me ever since I first saw it as just this beautiful gesture of finding something you like, in this case letter forms, and finding an excuse to notice it in the world and to document it and share it. I just think it's a gorgeous little love letter. And so all of this drag, I think it can be something that really reminds us to dig deeper and to find things within ourselves that can drive the work. And so drag is something that I think can be really nice because it is a little bit outside of traditional bounds of how we consider people trained or not. In design spaces, there are people who did not go to school for design, but it is pretty rare in my experience. And at least within drag, there's not really the same kind of rubric. It's more just like, do you look good? Are you fun to be around? Are you respectful? There's no real training required. And I think that can be a really big barrier of entry. It used to be, and pardon this very glamorous shot of me getting ready, but it used to be that in order to learn how to do various drag queen tricks, you had to be in that room, in that dressing room, learning from other pros who had been doing it for a long time. And things like covering your eyebrows, which is kind of a staple of drag queen makeup for a lot of artists, it was something you had to learn just by being around others. And there's something really beautiful about that and how it becomes a piece of like folk art, this little knowledge, but it can also be hard for others to enter that space. And so it changes over time into who's able to get into drag. Myself and those that I started with in the last year or so, we've largely learned how to do the makeup from watching YouTube. And sure, there are definitely things that are missed from that, like collaboration, like making a community, like friends or any of that fun stuff. But it really kind of opened up the door into who can get into drag. And I'm constantly thinking about ways that we can do that for design spaces as well. This is a little group of us who started drag all around the same time. And I love how many different experiences we have as people, as queer people, as professionals outside of this, and the various day jobs that all of my friends host. It's a really fascinating kind of Venn diagram of people within drag. And we were all largely able to do this because of so much being available online. It's something I think about a lot when thinking about my friend Ade Hogue, who sadly passed away around 2 years ago. He was a lettering artist, an instructor, a type designer, a graphic designer, just a Swiss Army knife of a creative human, and a wonderful, talented artist and beautiful spirit all around. He shared resources and made learning easier like it was his job, and he did it all for free. Even now on his website, you can go and look up his how-to of vectoring, which I always think of as an extremely generous gesture that he made to post this all online. He also talks a lot about how he learned it and kind of the less glamorous, messy, and real human aspects of it, like tracing the work of Neil Secretario, who would post his vectors online. And he wouldn't go and post these himself and claim them as his own, but just as a way to learn from how others had done. I really like that he made every part of this process open for others to learn from. And especially with time having gone by since he passed, it only gets more beautiful as a gesture. He was so like almost compulsively generous. It was wild to behold. And I think getting to work with him as a peer was really beautiful. And I learned so much from him. One of the things that will always stick with me was how he was so determined to share his methods with others. And this idea that sharing how you did something doesn't actually, it's not a threat to you and being able to do it. It doesn't mean that other people can take it and replace what you're doing. It's actually just kind of an opportunity to learn more about how others would do that based on their own experience, their own tools, their own context, and how you can maybe make something even more beautiful in the end. I saw it all the time when we would host these lettering parties with Frances McLeod, Ade, and I in Chicago, and we would just pop up, roll out butcher paper. Everybody would break out their weirdest pens, and we would draw to Spice Girl Pandora Radio. And it was kind of this, especially as time has gone by, this really golden moment in my life where I really felt like this exchange of creative ideas and supporting each other was so normalized and so beautiful and it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way where we all went in there wanting to connect with others and learn how to do this in a different way. And a lot of the reason why that was successful was Ade. So I learned so much from getting to work with him, and I'm constantly wondering how I can make drag spaces feel more like those lettering parties and more like environments that Ade was in. We would share work back and forth a lot. And there were times, candidly, where I was like, God, Ade is really online all the time as a person. And now I'm so grateful for all of these breadcrumbs of the times that we shared together. This was a piece of lettering he was working on that he had posted. We would send each other back sketches back and forth. And there's no denying that Ade and I were a little bit competitive. And that's a really unique kind of friendship that I've had. But I learned that it came from his athletic background and wanting to have somebody that could run laps next to you and make you run a little bit faster. I think that's very much the spirit that Ade brought to lettering and to design spaces, was a friendly, competitive spirit that would lift us all upwards. So my most sincere hope out of everybody in this room, out of everybody that could ever watch this or be within earshot, is to hopefully find peers that can push you forward to make you do things harder, weirder, better, stronger than you did before, much like Ade did for me in design, much like my partner Rybread does for me in drag. Because the truth is that boosting each other is totally free, and it's really, really fun to watch your friends succeed. It's something I've been able to be a part of now that I've gotten to meet some more people within type IRL, which is really wonderful. And I'm so, so grateful for it. Because more than anything, I think about how weird it is that I've met all of these incredible people solely based on our completely strange obsession with letter forms. What a weird thing it is. Similarly, I think drag has been really attractive to me because of how many different influences, life experiences, styles, personalities it all brings together. And what a weird thing that we all like to get together and just play dress up with each other. I think at its best, both design and drag are spaces where we can look at the many intersections from which people join our communities and highlight all of that together and be able to see that our strengths come from the number of different voices we have. And also that our strengths come from the many of different influences we have within ourselves. I really struggle to identify myself within design spaces. I get mealy mouth saying I'm a designer, illustrator, type designer, human rhinestone, whatever have you. Drag artists are a lot less humble about that, and I think it can be a really nice template to learn from. They embrace being multi-hyphenates. This is an artist here in town, One Half Nelson, who was a club kid for many years and blesses us with their artistry. And I learned so much from their uncompromising view of drag, and something I want to take with me into design as well. We see it also overlapping with fashion. Is She Hungry is my favorite Instagram to pull up to people who are outside of the drag verse and just be like, you want to see some weird stuff? It's really incredible. There's this really unique view that is made for and by queer people thanks to Hungry. Maybe you're into opera. Local singer and phenomenal drag king Luciana Verinati sings real live opera within a drag space, which is incredible, deafening, stunning. And to be able to reinvestigate something like opera, which can be very binary in the way that it's presented, and find a queer lens is really empowering and cool to be a part of. Something we see also in The Vixen, who is on RuPaul's Drag Race, I believe, season 10. Their activism in making spaces be more equitable and fair for those who are involved in them is something that I think we could all learn a lot from in drag and design spaces. Something I see with Izani, who is Isaiah Esquire and Johnny, their partner. They have a burlesque, boylesque team here in Portland. So if you want to bring dancing and movement into drag, it's absolutely a way. If you are interested in traditional theater and things that get to reinvestigate popular lore, Sunny Verbena is an incredible producer here in Portland who made this great show called Systeria that investigated a lot of beloved childhood heroes and what it would be like if they were in a queer environment. And also one of my new friends here in Portland, there's real live sax here at Drag in Portland. And I think that's really, really exciting that you don't have to kind of leave these old habits, these old, skills that you had. You can bring them to the forefront and you can let them absolutely loose in front of somebody's mimosas. And I think that's beautiful. We also see it in Cat Monster, who is a local drag monster here, and they've recently got into tattooing. I joke that she and I are in the Clown White Sisterhood, which is the name of this foundation. But I think their makeup is just incredible, so precise, and to get to see that faithfulness to the line, the positive of negative space in both the makeup and the tattooing is a gift to all of us, I think. And so drag really, I think it is for everybody. It is not just for cisgendered males. It is not just for the affluent. It is not just for those who can afford it. It is for everyone. And there is no good goddamn reason why design should not be the same way. I think if we start thinking too much about what drag is or what it isn't, we might end up gatekeeping, which is the opposite of what I want to achieve. I often think of this edict, which is all are welcome who make others feel welcomed. And at a point where you start maybe invalidating other people's experiences, where you start making people feel unsafe, then I think we should maybe reinvestigate this contract. But up until this point, so long as you're making everybody else feel good, you are welcome in drag. And I think that really the amount of people that I've met through drag is the reason why I keep doing it. Maybe more than asking what makes good drag, it's kind of more of an individual question amongst all of us of what makes good drag for me. And I wanted to show this picture of me and my partner Rybread because we started doing drag around the same time. And though we have so many shared influences, we have been together as partners for over 10 years. It's really funny how differently our drag has manifested out in the real world. And it's been a really beautiful thing to learn with Rybread. I can be very precise and kind of too rehearsed, and they don't really care about that. They'd rather get out there and perform, and I learned so much just from working with them. I think ultimately the only rule in drag and design is this, which is from a venue, I believe in Pennsylvania, called, the name is slipping my brain. But anyways, this sign is fantastic. Is it hot? Does it look good? Are you proud to serve it? I think those are the only rules that we can really judge drag with. There are an infinite number of solutions to what drag can be, just like there are for letters. You may think that there are only so many ways to draw a G, and then you see Dan make this absolutely gorgeous G in Gloridot, and you're like, aha, there is a new way. Seeing somebody do one of your favorite things all over again can give you a new, fresh perspective and can feel like hearing one of your favorite songs for the first time. As with this fabulous drag artist from Buenos Aires, or Gothic, who's in the new season of Dragula, I think their drag just totally breaks my brain and makes me want to do it in an entirely different way. And that's beautiful. Maybe ultimately there is nothing new out there in the world, but the way that you do it can be the newness. Maybe ultimately as lettering artists, as type designers, as drag performers, we're all just kind of cover artists in some way. We're doing a similar shape to what's been done in the past, but trying our best to put our own spin on it. And so if I may walk you through one of my favorite performances of all time. This is Katya, who was on RuPaul's Drag Race in the days before she got on the show. That's not meant to sound like a hipster. I'm sure I found out about her through the show, but I found this later and I thought it was a really great, it's an incredible drag performance, but also a great way to kind of talk about storytelling and how it works with drag. Katya enters wearing a ship and singing the Russian version of My Heart Will Go On from Titanic, as one does. And as she's going, she pulls out a piece of paper from one of the hulls, doodles on it, and hands it over to an audience member. It is, of course, a naked woman. She has painted us like one of her French girls. She also continues to stuff dollars into the hull, which I think is a great detail. And as she's going about her business, off from the right corner comes a little bit of trouble. It's the iceberg, and oh no, they bump into each other. Tragedy ensues. The iceberg pours water all over Katya's beautiful face. And as the song is nearing its climax, she emerges wearing a life vest because, of course, her heart will go on. And while this is a song that many of us have heard so many times in a Walgreens or on YouTube or in our older sister's bedroom, seeing Katya do it in this way felt entirely new and strange to me and made me wonder how I could bring that newness into design. It's something I also get to see a lot from Portland drag artists that I love, like Willie Wankme, who has a great number to the song Bring This Wolf a Banana, which I had not heard before. He hands the audience a plastic banana and encourages you to throw it, and he'll run after it like an excited dog, and then he gets very tired and then excited again. And thinking about drag as this interactive thing is something that scratches an itch design has not really been able to give me in that full way. I also see it a lot in the work of another Portland artist who I adore, Tingles Van Pelt. They were a part of that Systeria performance I mentioned, and they did a number based on Pinocchio. And what does it really mean to want to be a real boy? And so throughout the number, Pinocchio is getting excited by wigs and dresses and heels and kind of combating that desire to go and be boyish or girlish and the tension in between. It's wonderful. And that permission to reinvent is something I learned a lot about from drag. Having a strong concept goes a long way. We see it in this beautiful typeface called Exposure by Federico Para Barrios. And so as you move the dial, it gets more or less exposed as if camera light was the factor of its weight. That's really cool. We also see it in this climate words are hard, climate crisis font. So you can use a dial to kind of melt away the letters, and it mimics how much of the ice caps were left starting from 1979 up until 2050. Unfortunately, if you were coming here for all positive feelings, I'm afraid I can't promise that. This one's kind of a bummer, but it is a beautiful piece of design. I think going about the same thing over and over in the same way ends up yielding similarly banal results. If we were to go to an ice cream buffet and all brought vanilla, of course, vanilla is a great flavor, but if it's all we brought, it would be a little boring. And so I think there's interpretation that we must owe sometimes to our source material. Something I was thinking about a lot when I studied at type at Cooper, and I was looking at all of these traditional pieces of lettering that I know many students have looked at in the past. And drag, I think, also offers a couple of ideas around how to work within source material, which is that credit is always appreciated. But I do personally think, thanks to drag, that we should be using every opportunity to reinterpret that source material and leave our own little mark on it. Something I thought about a lot at Type of Cooper when I was looking at Father Edward Kadich's letters. He was a Catholic priest who was also a skilled sign painter, and it was his understanding that the Trajan columns letters had been painted first that really unlocked a lot of understanding for the type world. So as I was obsessed with this methodology, I was also feeling a lot of strangeness about working with material that was so close to the Catholic Church. So I was trying to think from the very get-go, from my sketches, how could I make Father Kadich a little bit uncomfortable? My working title initially was called Daddy Kadich, but I ended up calling it Sequin, which is still gay. And so I was just trying to think of like, how do I make a series of books for this presentation, and maybe imagine them as various leaflets left around Rome while Father Kadich was there, and just hoping he would find something a little bit gayer to make him nervous. But I think we often, when I'm drawing type, I also think a lot about the parallels of being queer versus straight. There's a lot of opportunities for work to reflect our world if we choose to take them. Sometimes we are looking for things that break the pattern in a bad way, as with body type. And sometimes if you're a queer person, you can feel like you are meant to keep the same status quo in a very neat and even way. But a lot of us are also dealing with what reads close and afar. In type design, we see this with Dwiggins's marionettes. The left is a great example of using a display typeface versus a text typeface. On the left, the marionettes reflected how he was carving them for performances to begin with, very beautiful up close. But from a couple feet further back in the room, it was hard to see all of those details. So we started reinvestigating those features, carving them out so they would read a little bit further back in the room. And we have the example on the right that looks more like a text typeface. It's also a consideration we see in drag with famous melted Barbie Trixie Mattel. Her makeup is iconic and beautiful and also a little intense up close, but it is painted to be viewed from a couple rows back, which I think is just a great visual metaphor. So drag is this thing that can constantly reinvent and come up with its own rubric. We saw it with Crystal LaBeija when she was entering drag pageants in the 60s and found that the judging was often mirroring a very white Eurocentric beauty standard. She created the ballroom scene to have a new environment to be able to establish queer beauty and its own standards. So a lot of things like reading, shade, all of that that we use in the vernacular today come back from ballroom culture. And so often a lot of the things that we were made fun of before can also be a way to bring our whole self with us in the future. Drag says maybe you were born a little bit androgynous, maybe you can't fit into the boxes. Well, if you're somebody as gorgeous as Bimini, you can be a supermodel with that. You can totally reinterpret beauty and glamour into something entirely new and different, as we see with Neo Hulu X. Their work is phenomenal. And also, you can be too much, whatever that means. I think drag, rather than discouraging being too much, often encourages being more. And I think that's really beautiful. We see it in the work of Crystal Method, who's always been one of my favorites from Drag Race. And I think rather than going for something more minimal and tasteful, drag relishes in excess and doing too much. It makes me think of this quote from John Waters that to understand bad taste, one must have very good taste. So drag really is this thing that reminds me often of like, who is the audience for? And I think it is for and by weirdos, which is a very different thing to design for than standard design. And so there are a lot of ways that we can kind of take things and make them a little bit more lush that suit our own standards. This is by Andorian Dauphine, who goes by Daytona Mess. They're studying at KBK right now, go Ando. And I think while some of these things can be really expressive and really kind of bold and active to look at, they can also really push us forward. And I think pushing the needle can be really important. Maybe doing things that are a little out of the ordinary can be something that makes others uncomfortable. But I think it's also important to remember that the status quo is protected by those who have the most to lose from it changing. And this is something we see a lot within the last year. So many states have pushed anti-trans and anti-drag bills. It's terrifying to watch this unfold in real time, especially to think of it using queer energy to fight these things rather than to just live our lives and be free. And I think ultimately a lot of these anti-trans bills are really roundabout ways to control, anti-drag bills are a roundabout way to control trans bodies by dictating what somebody can or cannot wear based on their assigned gender at birth. And so when people ask, why is it always political? I don't know why I hear this in my mom's voice, but I do. I think the answer is simple, that to be queer, we have to have our existence and our dignity up for constant debate in the public forum. And none of us really chose for that to be the case. So that's why I think drag will always be a little bit inherently political, because we are aware of how many structures are hostile, at the very least, towards us. So if you are somewhere outside of the straight, white, and narrow, you have probably felt a little bit of this hostility from the structures around us as well. And I have to say that while the hostility does not avoid us while we are all up in drag, finding a group of people that can see things from a similar way, that can build each other up as drag has afforded me, has been something that has really enriched my life. It's something I see from time to time and have been able to cultivate in earnest in design, to make food together and all share a meal is something that can really bring us together. And I think that's something that I'm seeking in all parts of my life. I think within drag, it can be especially meaningful because we are aware of how many spaces were not made for us to thrive in. And so we are actively creating those kind of spaces to do better in. And drag is also at the center of a lot of community raising, a lot of fundraisers, a lot of spaces where people come together. And it makes me think of this quote, which is one of my favorites I've ever come across. Being queer saved my life. Often we see queerness as deprivation, but when I looked at my life, I saw that queerness demanded an alternative innovation for me. I had to make alternative routes. It made me curious. It made me ask, is this enough for me? And I think maybe here is where we start to see where drag is such a big threat. If we are encouraged to ask, is this enough for me? We might also be asking that of each other, of our communities, of our elected officials. And by being this kind of conductor to all group together around, drag can be at the center of a lot of social movements. If drag says that we can be anything, it also kind of asks us why we can't be a better version of ourselves and a better community. I think ultimately the only things that really matter and make design work and community work are context, confidence, and conviction. How does this all relate to each other? Do I have the confidence to bring it together? And can I have the conviction to bring it out into the real world? And so ultimately, I think the real reminder here is that neither drag nor design will save the world on their own, but I think the community formed around them can make a really big impact towards doing that. And even as drag becomes more mainstream and is subject to more and more backlash, I think it's worth asking, are there still lessons in here that we can all learn from? I think maybe there's nothing more meaningful than being told you can't do something. I know there's plenty of design projects that I have in my portfolio from school that were made simply out of this, of a teacher saying, you can't do all gay stuff and all type stuff. And I said, watch me. But there's something really powerful in that kind of a warning. I also think that drag is this reminder to poke fun at tradition and traditional expectations, to maybe deliver something that has a little bit more humor in it, a little bit more nuance or subversion. I think it's always a reminder to do things your way, to do it in a way that uniquely reflects your standards, your culture, and your influences. And to try to really erase the lines between each other, not to reinforce binaries or divisions in between us in any way, to work through our discomfort, maybe rather than to avoid it, and that a good story lasts forever. And finally, I think that drag has been a reminder to do it for the people that you meet. And I think design should be too. Maybe the real graphic design was the friends we made along the way, or maybe the real drag was the friends we made along the way. But that's all I've got for you. Thank you so much.
Woo! Kyle, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Amazing. Dear Dark Lord, so glad you could join us today. People, we need questions for Kyle. I know we're all reeling from this sparkly display, but we want to hear your questions. So please drop them in the Q&A right now for Kyle. The chat is fire.
Yay.
But we need questions. Kyle, so one thing I have to say while we're waiting for everybody to drop their questions in the Q&A is I am blown away at your tailoring skills. Holy moly. Got to keep this PG. Where did you learn how to sew so magnificently?
I've been teaching myself for the last couple of years. Since quarantine, I started tracing t-shirts, and I realized I really only wear the same 3 shapes. So I just started tracing ones that existed. And yeah, I think the way that I describe it with sewing is that I don't know what I don't know. And so with design projects, I think we all get into them and we're like, well, I won't do that because that'll be hard. And unfortunately, or fortunately with sewing, I don't know that it was a mistake until I'm 12 hours into rhinestoning something. And that can be a great way to learn.
Yes, I loved your rhinestone patch too. That was absolutely stunning. When you said you did that all yourself, I was like,
it's fun. I mean, like, this is a group of type folks who know that spending a lot of time on something, it's normal. So I appreciate that.
Yes, it is definitely normal. Okay, we have a question. Holly asks, what are your thoughts on how generative AI is disrupting design and creativity?
Ooh, just a casual one.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting thing. I haven't gotten a lot of my brain around it, to be totally honest. Um, I can see how it is a mechanism for less gatekeeping in that, like, I have done some work for some drag queens, as an example, in my graphic design capacity, who've used AI to be like, this is roughly how we want the background of the poster to look. So they'll just type in a couple words and it can give them an instant mood board that somebody then takes and changes. So I think like that can be great if you use it as a tool for visualization in that way. I don't know, I'm somebody who's really bad at coding, so the prospect of using ChatGPT to help me with that sounds nice. But I do also think about the replacement of labor and just like, what does that mean if I'm choosing not to collaborate with a human to do that ChatGPT as an example? Or, yeah, I don't know. I think that I don't ever want to lose track of who's making things, no matter what that is. And um, I could see it as a series of, what is it, like a rat king? Is that where all their tails get tied together, where we're all just trying to replace one other creative? And like, can be very easy to start that way, where it's like, I don't want to do the coding, and the coding person doesn't want to hire the photographer, and the photographer doesn't want to hire the web person, and suddenly we've all replaced each other very quickly. So I don't know. I think it's something that we need a lot more thought around, to put it mildly.
Yeah. Okay, I'm typing the answer as we talk. So there may be a slight delay. All right, next question, Hugo. Thank you, Hugo. Hugo says, how long have you been painting your face? It is excellent, especially for someone who's only been doing drag since the summer.
Good question. So my first time ever in drag was like 10, 12 years ago, and somebody painted me, so that doesn't count. And it was just for Halloween. And then I did it a couple times in pandemic. I had like a Zoom birthday party where I dressed up as a cactus and did a drag look. And so that was my first time really painting. But it's really just been since, I would say, July, that I took a really hard look at it and how to do it. I definitely don't think I know it all yet. But the slogan I've learned is that it's good from afar, but far from good. So I think what we're shooting for. So I think don't zoom in, do me a couple favors that way and it'll look better. But I don't know. There's something really freeing about how quickly it all comes off into a face wipe. So it's not that serious.
Wow. So you haven't actually been doing this yourself for that long, but you obviously have design skills. So they came into play, right? They certainly didn't hurt.
I do like to sketch things out first because I don't know, I think about my brain in like execution mode is a very different thing than ideation mode. So if you're under a time crunch and have to get to the gig, I want to be thinking as little as possible. So I'll sketch that before.
I loved those sketches, by the way. They were fantastic. It was really cool to see. It was like the iterative process, but for your own look, which is amazing. Ryan says, this sounds shady, but Ryan swears it's not. Why was it only recently that you dabbled with type or lettering as part of your drag, the PSU example?
Great example. I think I shared this with Dan Radigan over TypeCon, but I think both type and drag are the two things I've been most afraid to really throw myself into because they are the two art forms that I've always loved the most. And so taking up space in that just felt like I wanted to be really careful, really have my stuff together as much as possible. And so I think once I got either of those started, the idea of putting them together was still really scary. I do have some more hopes to do like font numbers in drag. I have one that I'm working on that I'll be able to post soon. I do want to converge those things because I think it's really funny. I don't know. I hope that other people laugh at like my type names before, my drag names before being like Helvetica and things like that. But I don't know. I really want to do more type and illustration on my face.
Awesome. We're all looking forward to seeing that. And I like Helvetica also. It's a great stage name. Okay, thanks for bringing on the questions, everybody. Carl asks, in terms of traditional type design, what's a first step you suggest to someone who finds it hard to break free of the forms they're accustomed to?
Great question. Also one I'm not entirely qualified to answer in a way, but that is also my perspective on most things in life. So I'm not super qualified. I think that I've learned some really fabulous things watching Zrinka in particular work with somebody that really changed my brain. Sometimes she sketches a lot of the negative space around letters, which may sound obvious, but changing the focus of what you're working on to being the surrounding space rather than like the containing space of a letter can be really life-changing. I think also drawing upside down or reverse can do a similar thing of convincing your brain that you're looking at a different shape altogether. I think what's uniquely tough about type is the way that at least I can lose objectivity at a certain point. If you've been staring at a G and you make it look so strange that it no longer looks like a G to other people, you can still convince yourself in your brain that it is a G. So I think the more ways that you can like force your brain to draw like it's an alien can be really helpful. So drawing upside down, changing the substrate, drawing in like really fat markers that you can't get all noodly in the details, cutting it up and gluing it back together. I think like physical drawing and all of that can be fun.
Great tips, Kyle. Okay, Stephen Cole says, may I share some of your fabulous slides on fonts in use?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, there we go. That was the easy answer. Yes, go for it, Stoof. And Jenny, hi Jenny, asked, will you be selling merch in the future? Ooh.
Sewing lurch.
Merch.
Oh,
We want to buy your shirts with your lettering on it. We want to buy your sequins.
I have to think about it. I think I'm in this place where like I don't know how to make merch in a way that feels sustainable and like not making more landfill garbage. And that's not judging anybody that does it, but I'm just like stuck in that. I know there's a way, but I'm kind of stuck in that place of like, how do I do it in a way that feels good to what those values are, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think things like stickers and things like that will definitely be in the short term.
Right. And then also you want to consider the labor that's going into creating the merch as well, right? I mean,
Totally.
you can't necessarily make it all, but you want to find a sustainable way to do that. Okay. Yeah, understood. It's a tough one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we got more questions. We actually have to leave at 1:30. That's a hard exit. So let's see if we can take care of these. All the questions started pouring in right now. Let's get to it. Ellen says, I love the comparison of tools, pens and makeup brushes and paint brushes, for instance. Since doing drag, have you found any materials or tools or techniques from that world that influence your design language or form?
Yes. The thing that I can think about the most is like the importance of prepping your tool is like a really different thing that I'm thinking about when I go back to lettering. And what that means is like being better about tamping the brush, like things of just really simple technique in that way that I often overlook can be the difference of like black liner going on or not. So kind of always keeping care of those brushes is a really big part of it. In terms of like tools, I find myself like craving the way that so a drag friend just recommended this black liner to me, and it goes on like silk. It is the most like dangerously smooth. It's like baby butts on ice, like just gliding type of a thing. And I wish that I could find like an ink and paper combination that has as little friction, if that makes sense. So I find myself now starting to crave that in other ways, but also trying to find ways to make like a type and lettering can be a game of efficiency, and I'm trying to find out how to do that in drag as well. So I did like little stencils today that I cut out. I'm just trying to always find ways that like maybe I know how to do this in a different way.
I like the baby butts on ice analogy. I'm using that in the
All
future.
yours.
Yeah, and definitely you want to find an ink on paper that feels like baby butts on ice. I get that. Okay, Mary says, this isn't really a question, but Mary says, Kyle has a great book on Etsy. Okay. Check Etsy, folks. Anna asks, oh yeah, let's see. Do we have Kyle's Etsy link? Mary may have posted that in the chat. Okay, got it. Anna, and if Mary didn't, somebody can, please. Anna asked, do you have any advice on how to continue to put your own stamp in the work you do, especially for someone working within binary structures like corporations or agencies? Yeah, that's a great question.
Yes. Something I think about was a conversation I had with a friend like 8 years ago, and we came up with this really ham-fisted combination of words called your visual heritage. It makes me cringe a little when I think about it, but it was a really fun, if I'm not cringing at myself, I'm not living either. But it was a really fun way to kind of be able to put on paper like what were my inspirations. So we just kind of started having a conversation and writing down little snippets of like, what was the first thing that made you think like, oh, I want to make visuals? And so maybe thinking about those as core parts of your personality in a way. For me, it was like my mom's record collection. So like big 60s, 70s type stuff where it misregisters and misprints. I kind of love the chaos of that. And for him, it was things like punk magazines, album covers, graffiti. And so you can kind of start figuring out what are the similarities between these things, what are similar means of production or textures or cultural things that show up in all of these. And I think that way you can also start building a little bit of a difference between what I do in the day and what I can do in my own time. Because that way you can maybe lean into like more graffiti, more things that feel like they're full of expression and possibility outside of what we have to do for work. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. It does. So I think that I sense a slight contradiction between bringing your whole self to work and then having to make these kinds of partitions. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's fair.
It's tough. Yeah, it's tough.
I think bringing my fullest self in my personal work because it is more emotionally sustainable than trying to do that within corporate structures, which I never found the recipe for.
Yeah, yeah. And it may not be possible, right? Because that's their essence. Okay. Yeah. All right, let's see, what do we got? One more question, and that's from Shessa Garba. Hi, Shessa. Shessa says, the question that is on everyone's mind, what is the eyeliner brand that is like baby butts on ice?
Great question, because I moved all my makeup. Okay, so it's this stuff called, do I have to do the beauty blogger thing? I can put its message in here, but it's Inglot, INGLOT. And it's this like little tub. They also have it in white, which I have not used, but friends have had really good things about. You do need to play around a little bit with what kind of brush works well, because I found out that some of these little ones that I bought for detail can really kind of carve it out too much. So it does take a little bit of experimentation, but you don't really have to set it with too much powder. It stays in place, and you can do really graphic things with it. So Inglot is this brand, and it's like $15 on Amazon, but I've had it for about a month and a half and I've not made a dent. So and I also use a lot of it, so I feel like it's a good find.
Excellent. That is a hot tip. Thank you so much. All right, folks, if there are no more questions for fabulous Kyle, we will call it a day. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise and sharing all these other wonderful type designers and drag queens and just general cool people, because that's really something that you've brought to every lecture that I've seen you do, and I really appreciate it, just sharing your community with us.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for this space. I'm so grateful.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And please join us again in 3 weeks when we will be hosting none other than James Edmondson of Oh No Type Co. So bring those hot questions, burning questions for James next time. And we'll see you all then. Mwah.